He caught her before she hit the ground. That was the first time Adrian Kane touched another human being in 3 years. And the moment his hands closed around her waist, feeling the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric of her dress, something inside his chest cracked open like ice, breaking under spring sun. She looked up at him with those wide hazel eyes, breathless and startled. Her lips parted in surprise, and Adrian felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. But that moment, that single instant when the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, watching the untouchable CEO hold a trembling woman in his arms, was just the beginning. If you want to discover how a clumsy collision at a corporate Christmas party transformed two lonely souls into something neither of them expected, subscribe now. Leave a like if you believe that sometimes the person who saves us is the one we never saw coming. And tell me in the comments, what moment changed your life forever? Your presence here means everything. The Metropolitan Hotel ballroom glittered like a frozen dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across marble floors, so polished they reflected the hundreds of elegantly dressed people moving through the space like pieces in an elaborate chess game. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the peculiar tension that always accompanied corporate gatherings where careers could be made or destroyed with a single conversation. December snow pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, transforming Manhattan into a watercolor of white and gold beyond the glass. Adrian Kane stood alone near the south entrance, exactly where he'd positioned himself for the last 6 company Christmas parties. At 41, he was the youngest CEO in Kane Industries' 70-year history, and certainly the most feared. His charcoal suit was custom-tailored, his dark hair precisely cut, his jaw clean-shaven in a way that emphasized the sharp angles of his face. But it was his eyes that made people uncomfortable. Steel gray, perpetually cold. They looked through people rather than at them, as if he was constantly calculating their worth and finding them wanting. He held a glass of scotch he wouldn't drink, standing with the rigid posture of someone who'd forgotten how to relax, watching his employees pretend to enjoy themselves while secretly hoping he wouldn't notice them. 3 years ago, Adrian had been different. 3 years ago, he'd smiled, laughed, moved through rooms like this with easy confidence. 3 years ago, he'd been engaged to a woman he thought he loved, planning a future that seemed bright and certain. Then came the car accident, the one that killed his younger sister Emma in an instant, and left him with survivor's guilt so profound it had turned him into stone. After that, Adrian had methodically removed every soft thing from his life. He'd broken his engagement, sold the house he'd been renovating, fired his therapist, and buried himself in work with the single-minded focus of someone trying to outrun their own humanity. Kane Industries had tripled its value under his leadership, but everyone agreed the new CEO was more machine than man. Across the ballroom, Maya Rodriguez adjusted her grip on the tray of champagne flutes and tried not to trip over her own feet. Again. At 27, she'd been working as a server for elite events catering for 2 years, taking on every extra shift she could to supplement her real income as a freelance graphic designer. Tonight's corporate party paid double because it was Christmas Eve and because the client was Kane Industries, known for their exacting standards and their terrifying CEO, who apparently inspected everything from the flower arrangements to the precise temperature of the hors d'oeuvres. Maya had seen Adrian Kane from across the room when she'd first arrived. Impossible not to notice him. He stood there like a beautiful statue, all sharp edges and cold perfection, radiating an aura that seemed to push people away even as they couldn't stop stealing glances at him. She'd heard the whispers from other servers. Don't approach him directly. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, don't spill anything near him. The stories painted him as some kind of corporate monster, brilliant but heartless, the kind of man who'd fire you for breathing too loudly in his vicinity. But Maya had also noticed something else, the way his fingers gripped that Scotch glass with just slightly too much tension, the way his eyes swept the room with what looked less like judgment and more like exhaustion, the way he stood perfectly still, as if movement itself required too much energy. She recognized that posture. It was the stance of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will, someone who'd forgotten they were allowed to fall apart. The evening progressed in the predictable rhythm of corporate events. Speeches were made, awards were presented. The CFO made a joke that everyone laughed at too enthusiastically. Maya wove through the crowd with practiced efficiency, offering champagne, collecting empty glasses, making herself invisible the way good servers learn to do. She was thinking about the design project due Monday, mentally sketching layouts in her head, when it happened. Someone bumped her from behind. Hard. Maya stumbled forward, her tray tilting dangerously, champagne sloshing over the rims of crystal flutes. She tried to catch her balance, but her heel caught on something, maybe the edge of a rug, maybe just her own clumsy coordination. And suddenly, she was falling. Time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does when disaster is inevitable. She saw the marble floor rushing up to meet her, saw the champagne glasses leaving the tray in a glittering arc, saw people turning to watch with expressions of shock and secondhand embarrassment. And then she wasn't falling anymore. Strong hands caught her waist, pulling her upright with surprising gentleness. Her body collided with something solid and warm. She gasped, her hands instinctively grabbing onto broad shoulders covered in expensive wool. The scent of cedar and something darker, something like night air, surrounded her. Her face was suddenly inches from a throat, a jaw, and when she looked up, she found herself staring directly into the steel-gray eyes of Adrian Kane. The entire ballroom seemed to stop. Conversations died mid-sentence. People froze with champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Even the string quartet faltered for a half-beat before continuing. Because everyone who worked at Kane Industries knew the cardinal rule. You did not touch Adrian Kane. Ever. He didn't shake hands if he could avoid it. He maintained a physical distance from everyone, as if proximity itself was dangerous. And here was this nobody, this server, pressed against him with her hands on his shoulders and his hands on her waist, both of them locked in a moment that felt far too intimate for a room full of 300 witnesses. Maya's brain seemed to have short-circuited. She was aware of several things simultaneously. The warmth of his hands seeping through her dress. The way his fingers were spread across her ribcage, strong but careful, as if he was holding something precious. The fact that his eyes had widened just slightly, the cold gray warming to something that looked almost like surprise. The way his lips had parted, his breath catching audibly. And most shocking of all, the way he wasn't letting go. Neither of them moved. Maya knew she should pull away, should apologize, should disappear before this man could destroy her career with a single word to her boss. But his hands on her waist felt like an anchor, and something in his eyes held her frozen. It wasn't anger she saw there. It was confusion, as if he couldn't understand why he was still touching her, why he hadn't immediately stepped back and recoiled from the contact. "I'm so sorry," Maya finally managed to whisper, but her voice came out breathless, unsteady. "I didn't mean to. Someone pushed me. I'm so sorry, sir." Adrian blinked, as if her voice had broken whatever spell had held him. But his hands stayed where they were, fingers pressed against her sides, thumbs resting just below her ribs. "Are you hurt?" His voice was different than she'd expected. Deep, yes, but rough around the edges, as if he didn't use it often for anything beyond commands and criticism. "No, I'm fine. You caught me. Thank you. I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out in a rush. Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could feel it. She became aware that her hands were still gripping his shoulders, and that somewhere in the fall, her fingers had actually grasped the back of his neck, touching bare skin. She jerked her hands away as if burned. The movement seemed to wake Adrian from whatever trance he'd fallen into. He released her waist and stepped back, but his movements were uncertain, almost reluctant. His eyes swept over her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed, seen in a way that was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. For just a moment, something flickered across his features. Something that looked like longing, or recognition, or hunger. Then his expression shuddered closed, the walls slamming back into place with almost audible force. "Be more careful," he said, and his voice had returned to its customary flatness. But Maya noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he adjusted his cuffs. Noticed the way he swallowed hard before turning away. Noticed that he didn't immediately dismiss her or call her supervisor or do any of the cruel things the rumors suggested he would do. The ballroom resumed its normal rhythm, as if someone had pressed play on a paused movie. Conversations restarted. The quartet played louder. People deliberately looked away, pretending they hadn't just witnessed the impossible. Maya's supervisor appeared at her elbow within seconds, face pale, already apologizing profusely to anyone who would listen. But Adrian had already disappeared into the crowd, moving toward the exit with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested he needed to be anywhere but here. Maya spent the rest of the evening in a daze, mechanically performing her duties, while her mind replayed those few seconds, over and over. The warmth of his hands, the look in his eyes before the coldness returned, the way he'd asked if she was hurt, as if her well-being actually mattered to him, the way he'd trembled before letting her go. She'd expected anger, disgust, fury at being touched by someone so far beneath his station. Instead, she'd seen something that looked almost like fear, as if he was the one who'd been knocked off balance, and not just physically. What Maya didn't know was that Adrian had left the party entirely, taking his private elevator down to the underground garage and sitting in his Bentley with the engine off, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. He could still feel her. The exact pressure of her body against his chest, the warmth of her skin through the thin fabric, the subtle scent of her hair, something like vanilla and rain. The way she'd looked at him without immediate fear, with something in those hazel eyes that was closer to concern, as if she'd seen past the armor to the exhausted man underneath. For 3 years, Adrian had successfully avoided physical contact with other humans. He'd structured his entire life around maintaining distance. He shook hands only when absolutely necessary, kept a physical buffer between himself and everyone else, never allowed anyone close enough to breach the walls he'd built. Physical touch reminded him too much of what he'd lost, of his sister's hand in his during that last conversation, of his fiancée's disappointed embrace when he'd told her he couldn't marry her, of his own humanity, which felt too dangerous to acknowledge. But tonight, his body had acted on pure instinct. He'd seen her falling and hadn't thought, had just moved. And when he'd caught her, when his hands had closed around her waist, and she'd looked up at him with those wide eyes, something inside him had ignited, something he'd thought was dead. For those few seconds, he hadn't felt cold, hadn't felt empty, had felt instead like a man waking from a long sleep, blinking against sudden light, confused and overwhelmed and terrified by the intensity of simply feeling anything at all. Adrian pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to erase the memory of her face. He didn't even know her name. She was just a server, someone hired for the evening, someone he'd never see again. This reaction was absurd, dangerous. He needed to forget it happened, needed to rebuild the walls she'd somehow cracked just by existing in his arms for 30 seconds. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the way she'd looked at him. Not with fear or calculation or the desperate need to impress, just with simple human connection, as if she'd recognized something in him that he'd been hiding from everyone, including himself. The next morning, Adrian sat in his corner office on the 62nd floor, watching dawn break over Manhattan through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. He hadn't slept. Instead, he'd spent the night researching elite events catering, scrolling through their website, looking at staff photos, trying to find her face among the dozens of servers they employed. It was irrational, obsessive, completely unlike him. Adrian Kane did not chase after women. He barely noticed them. His last relationship had ended 3 years ago, and he'd felt nothing but relief at the absence of expectations. But now he couldn't stop thinking about hazel eyes and the scent of vanilla, about hands that had gripped his shoulders with surprising strength, about a voice that had whispered apologies while sounding more worried about him than about herself, about the way his body had responded to her touch, as if she'd completed a circuit he didn't know was broken. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, the way Margaret had been doing for 15 years. At 60, she was the only person who dared treat Adrian like a human being, rather than a bomb that might detonate. "You look terrible," she announced, setting a coffee on his desk. "Good morning to you too, Margaret." "Don't good morning me. I heard about what happened at the party." She settled into the chair across from his desk, fixing him with the look that had probably terrified her own children. "Who was she?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "No one. A server who tripped. It was nothing." "Adrian." Margaret leaned forward. "I've known you since you were 26 years old. I watched you build this company. I watched you survive losing Emma. I watched you turn yourself into this." She gestured at him. "This frozen thing that goes through the motions of living without actually being alive. And last night, for the first time in 3 years, I saw you look startled. Which means, whoever that girl was, she was not nothing." It was an accident, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then why do you look like someone who just discovered they're capable of feeling again, and it's scaring you to death?" Margaret asked softly. "Adrian, at some point, you have to forgive yourself for surviving. Emma would hate what you've become." The words hit like a physical blow. Adrian's hands clenched on his desk. "Don't. Someone needs to say it." Margaret stood, moving toward the door. "That girl, whoever she is, she got through your defenses for 5 seconds, and you're terrified. Good. Be terrified. It means you're still human." She paused at the threshold. "The question is, are you brave enough to do something about it? Or are you going to let fear win again?" After she left, Adrian sat in the growing light, his sister's face floating through his memory. Emma, with her bright laugh and boundless optimism. Emma, who'd believed in love and second chances and the basic goodness of people. Emma, who'd told him the week before she died that she worried about him, that he worked too hard, that he needed to let someone in before he forgot how. Maya didn't expect to ever think about Adrian Kane again. It had been a moment, a strange collision of circumstances, nothing more. She'd survived without getting fired, which was the important thing. Elite Events had paid her for the full evening, despite her supervisor's initial panic. Life went on. She had designs to finish, rent to pay, a normal existence that had no room for brooding billionaires with cold eyes and surprisingly gentle hands. Except she couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd looked at her, the way his touch had felt protective rather than restraining. the tremble in his fingers before he'd pulled away. Maya had always been good at reading people, at seeing beneath surfaces to the truth underneath. And in that brief moment when Adrian Kane had held her, she'd seen straight through to his core. She'd seen loneliness, the kind that ate you alive from the inside, the kind that turned you into a ghost walking through your own life. She knew that loneliness, had felt it herself after her father died 2 years ago, leaving her alone in a city that didn't care if you disappeared. She'd spent 6 months barely functioning, going through motions, wondering if anyone would notice if she simply stopped existing. It was her art that had saved her, the ability to pour grief into colors and shapes until it became something bearable. But she remembered what it felt like to be that hollow, and she'd seen that same hollowness in Adrian Kane's eyes. Monday morning found Maya in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, surrounded by sketches and coffee cups, trying to focus on the logo redesign for a local restaurant. But her pencil kept drawing the same thing: sharp lines, cold angles, gray eyes that held depths she wanted to understand. She was sketching his face from memory when her phone rang. Maya Rodriguez? The voice was crisp, professional, female. Yes? This is Margaret Chen, executive assistant to Adrian Kane at Kane Industries. Mr. Kane would like to commission you for a design project. Are you available to meet this afternoon? Maya's pencil clattered to the floor. I'm sorry, what? Mr. Kane needs a complete rebranding package for one of our subsidiary companies. He was impressed by your portfolio and would like to discuss the project. Can you come to our offices at 2 o'clock? My portfolio? How did he? Maya's mind raced. She hadn't given anyone her name at the party, hadn't handed out business cards. She maintained a website with her design work, but it wasn't particularly high profile. Mr. Kane is very thorough in his research. Margaret's voice carried a hint of amusement. Should I tell him you're available? Maya should have said no, should have recognized this for what it clearly was: a man with too much power trying to find a woman who'd accidentally touched him. It was inappropriate, possibly unethical, definitely strange. But something in her chest tightened at the thought of seeing him again, of looking into those gray eyes with full awareness this time, of maybe understanding why he'd looked at her like she was both his salvation and his doom. I'll be there, she heard herself say. Kane Industries occupied the top 15 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Maya had never been anywhere so aggressively expensive. The lobby alone probably cost more than every place she'd ever lived combined. Marble and steel and soaring ceilings, all designed to make visitors feel appropriately insignificant. The elevator to the executive floors required a special key card, which the security guard provided after checking her ID against some list, with an expression that suggested he didn't understand why she was there either. The 62nd floor was somehow even more intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manhattan spreading out like a kingdom below. The receptionist, young and polished, and wearing more on her wrist than Maya made in 6 months, directed her to wait in a conference room that could have housed her entire apartment. Maya sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her laptop and tried not to fidget with her portfolio bag. When the door opened, it wasn't Adrian who entered, but Margaret. The older woman assessed Maya with sharp eyes, and something in her expression softened slightly. So you're the one who broke through, she murmured, almost to herself. I'm sorry. Margaret shook her head. Never mind. Thank you for coming on short notice. I have to warn you that Mr. Kane has been... She paused, choosing words carefully. Unusual today. If he seems intense, try not to take it personally. Before Maya could ask what that meant, Margaret stepped aside, and Adrian Kane walked into the room. Maya's breath caught. She'd seen him from across a ballroom, had felt his hands on her waist. But somehow, She'd still underestimated the sheer physical presence of him. He was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders. His suit was navy today, perfectly tailored, but his tie was slightly loosened, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that suggested he'd been pulling at it. His hair was less precisely styled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. And his eyes, those steel gray eyes, locked onto her with an intensity that made everything else in the room fade into background noise. "Miss Rodriguez." His voice was rougher than she remembered. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Kane." Maya stood, extending her hand automatically, then froze. Should she offer to shake hands with someone who clearly avoided physical contact? But Adrian had already moved forward, his hand closing around hers with surprising warmth. The touch lasted a beat too long, his fingers pressing against her palm, as if memorizing the shape of it. "Please, sit." He released her hand and moved to the chair across from her. But his movements were less controlled than they'd been at the party. There was a restlessness to him, an energy barely contained. "I'll be direct. I don't actually need a rebranding package." Maya blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I needed an excuse to see you again that didn't make me look completely insane." Adrian's jaw tightened, as if the admission cost him something. "I don't know your name. You disappeared before I could ask. I had my team track down the catering company, get their employee records, cross-reference people who were working Friday night with freelance designers in New York. It took all weekend." Maya should have been alarmed. This was stalker behavior, abuse of power, everything wrong with wealthy men who thought they could have anything they wanted. But instead, she found herself fighting a smile. Because he looked so uncomfortable with his own actions, so clearly out of his depth. "That's extremely creepy, Mr. Kane." "I know." He dragged a hand through his hair, destroying what was left of its styling. "I'm aware this is inappropriate. If you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll also personally ensure that Elite Events receives a very generous donation for my behavior." "Why?" Maya leaned forward. "Why go to all this trouble?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because you touched me," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I haven't let anyone touch me in 3 years, because when I caught you, something inside me that I thought was dead woke up. Because I can't stop thinking about the way you looked at me, like you could see straight through everything I've built to protect myself. Because you felt like coming home, and I don't know what to do with that." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable, and completely at odds with everything Maya had heard about the cold CEO who felt nothing. She saw the fear in his eyes, the way his hands clenched on the armrests of his chair, the rapid pulse at his throat. He was terrified, terrified of what he was feeling, terrified of what it meant, terrified that she would reject him and prove that he was right to keep everyone away. "I'm not looking for a relationship," Maya said carefully, watching his face. "I don't date wealthy men who use their resources to track down strangers." Adrian nodded stiffly, something dying in his eyes. "I understand." "But," Maya continued, and his gaze snapped back to hers, "I am looking for interesting design projects, and you clearly need someone who isn't afraid of you to tell you when you're being ridiculous. So maybe we could start there, professionally, and see what happens." The hope that bloomed across Adrian's features was almost painful to witness, like watching winter break. "Professionally," he repeated. "You really need a rebrand? 3 of our subsidiaries could actually use new visual identities." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wasn't completely lying." Maya laughed, surprising herself. "Okay then. Tell me about your companies, Mr. Kane. Let's see if I'm good enough to work for someone so clearly demanding." They talked for 2 hours. Adrian described his businesses with the kind of passion that suggested he actually cared about what they built, not just the profit margins. Maya asked questions, made notes, started sketching preliminary ideas. The conversation flowed with unexpected ease, punctuated by moments where their eyes would meet and hold, where the air between them would charge with something neither was quite ready to name. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning the conference room golden, Maya found herself actually enjoying this. Adrian had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that emerged once he relaxed slightly. He listened when she spoke, really listened, asking thoughtful questions that suggested he valued her expertise. And every so often, she'd catch him staring at her with an expression that made her heart skip. Not predatory or entitled, just wondering, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. When Margaret knocked to announce Adrian's next meeting, they both startled like they'd forgotten the outside world existed. Adrian stood reluctantly, adjusting his tie. "Can we schedule another meeting to discuss the projects further?" "Yes." Maya gathered her things, hyper-aware of his proximity as they moved toward the door. "Email me the details about the subsidiaries, and I'll put together some preliminary concepts." "I could also email you about other things," Adrian said, then looked surprised at his own words. "I mean, if you wanted to talk. Not about work." Maya paused at the threshold, looking up at him. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the faint shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd slept as poorly as she had. "You want to email me? Not call?" "I'm better with written words." A faint flush colored his cheeks. "When I speak, I say things like, 'You felt like coming home to women I barely know and make them think I'm unhinged.'" "For what it's worth," Maya said softly. "I didn't think you were unhinged. Lonely, maybe. Desperate, definitely. But not unhinged." "Well, that's something." His lips quirked in what might have been an actual smile. "I'll email you tonight." The email arrived at 11 p.m. Maya was in bed, scrolling through her phone, when the notification appeared. The message was long, carefully written, nothing like the usual short business correspondence. Adrian wrote about his day, about a problem with a construction project, about the view from his office at night. He asked about her work, her process, what she loved about design. It felt personal, intimate in the way late-night conversations always are, when defenses are down and truth comes easier. Maya found herself writing back, telling him about growing up in a family where money was always tight, but love was abundant. About her father teaching her to see the world as composition and color. About the loneliness of freelance work, spending days without speaking to anyone. About her tiny apartment that barely fit her, but felt like home because every inch of it was hers. They emailed back and forth until 2 in the morning, the conversation flowing with the easy rhythm of old friends rather than strangers. Adrian told her about losing his sister, about how guilt had hollowed him out, about building walls because, if he didn't feel anything, nothing could hurt him, about recognizing himself in what Maya described as loneliness, and realizing that maybe he'd been alone long enough. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Maya would work on the rebranding projects, which were legitimate and complex enough to require regular meetings. They'd sit in that conference room, discussing color palettes and brand positioning, and the conversations would drift into personal territory. Adrian would tell her about his childhood, about parents who'd seen love as weakness and raised their children accordingly. Maya would share stories about her father, about the year she'd spent grieving, about slowly learning to live again. And every night, they'd email. Long messages that revealed more than either seemed capable of saying in person. Adrian wrote about the moments he'd felt most alive, which were so few and far between, they broke Maya's heart. Maya wrote about her dreams, the design studio she wanted to open, the life she was trying to build from nothing. They shared pieces of themselves in carefully crafted sentences, building intimacy through words on screens, getting to know each other in a way that felt both safe and dangerous. But they didn't touch. After that first handshake, Adrian maintained careful distance. He'd gesture for her to enter rooms first, making sure their bodies didn't brush. He'd hand her documents without letting their fingers meet. When they stood at windows looking at the city, he'd stay inches away, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but far enough that contact was impossible. Maya understood it was intentional, this controlled proximity. He was protecting himself, and maybe protecting her from the intensity of what he felt, which she suspected might overwhelm them both. It was Margaret who finally interfered. 6 weeks after that first meeting, she cornered Maya in the hallway outside Adrian's office. "He's in love with you," the older woman said bluntly. "You know that, right?" Maya's heart stuttered. "We're just friends, working together." "Honey, I've known Adrian Kane for 15 years. He doesn't have friends. He has employees and acquaintances and people he tolerates. But you? He talks about you constantly. He smiles when he reads your emails. He actually left work early last week to make it to a design event you mentioned. He's in love with you, and he's too terrified to do anything about it. Because the last time he let himself care about someone, she died." "I know about Emma," Maya said quietly. "Do you know he blames himself? That he thinks if he'd been driving faster or slower or taken a different route, she'd still be alive? That he broke off his engagement because he decided he didn't deserve happiness?" Margaret's expression softened. "He needs someone to show him that being alive means risking pain. That love is worth the terror. I think you might be that person." That night, instead of emailing, Maya called. Adrian answered on the first ring, his voice rough. "Maya, is everything okay? I need to tell you something." She took a breath, courage gathering. "These past 6 weeks have been the best part of my days. Not just the work, though I love the projects, but talking with you, learning who you are. I look forward to your emails more than anything else in my life right now. And I think you feel the same way." Silence on the other end, but she could hear his breathing, slightly uneven. "I do," he finally said. "Then why do you act like touching me would be dangerous? Why all this distance when we both know there's something between us?" "Because it is dangerous." His voice cracked slightly. "Maya, I haven't let myself feel anything real in 3 years. And what I feel when I'm around you is so intense, it scares me. If I touch you, if I let myself have what I want, I don't know if I'll survive losing it." "Losing you?" "You won't lose me. You can't promise that. Emma couldn't promise that either, and she's dead. My fiancée promised, and she left. Everyone leaves." Maya closed her eyes, aching for him. "You're right. I can't promise I'll never leave. I can't promise I won't die in a car accident or get sick or decide this isn't what I want. But Adrian, if you never let anyone in because you're afraid of loss, you're already living like you're dead. Is that really what Emma would want for you?" The silence stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. Then, "No, she'd hate it. She'd hate what I've become." "I'm not asking you to stop being afraid," Maya said gently. "I'm just asking you to be afraid with me instead of alone. We could try this. Actually try. Not just emails and professional meetings. Real dates. Real connection. Real touch." She paused. "I want to touch you, Adrian. Not accidentally this time. With intention. Because I'm choosing you." His breath audibly caught. "I don't know how." "Then learn with me." The next evening, Adrian picked Maya up from her apartment in Queens, driving himself rather than sending a car, which she suspected was a bigger gesture than it seemed. He stood at her door in jeans and a sweater, looking younger without the armor of his suit, nervous in a way that made her heart squeeze. "Hi," he said, and his voice was soft, uncertain. "Hi." Maya grabbed her coat. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk without my office watching us, without expectations." He led her to his car, opening her door, and when she slid into the passenger seat, he paused. Just for a moment, his hand hovered near her shoulder, not quite touching. Then he withdrew, closing her door gently. They drove to a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, about as far from the corporate elegance of Adrian's usual world as possible. The owner greeted him by name with obvious affection, which surprised Maya until Adrian explained that he'd been coming here since college, back when he was nobody, just a kid trying to build something from nothing. Over pasta and wine, they talked with a freedom they'd never quite achieved in his office. Adrian told her about the business he'd built, but also about the cost, the friendships he'd sacrificed, the family he'd pushed away after Emma's death because their grief reminded him too much of his own, the fiancée he'd loved, but not enough, who deserved someone capable of real emotion. He spoke about guilt, like it was a weight he carried in his bones, something that had become so familiar he'd forgotten life could feel different. Maya shared her own losses, her father's death from cancer, the 6 months she'd spent afterwards barely functioning, the designs she'd created in that period, dark and jagged and full of pain that had nowhere else to go, how art had saved her, giving her a way to transform grief into something beautiful, how she'd slowly learned that surviving meant choosing to keep living, even when every day felt impossible. "I'm afraid of what I feel for you," Adrian admitted as they shared tiramisu. "It's too much, too fast. We've known each other 6 weeks. That's nothing. And yet when I think about you not being in my life anymore, it feels like I'd lose something essential." "I'm afraid too," Maya confessed. "You're this brilliant, complicated man who could probably have anyone. And I'm just a freelance designer from Queens who sometimes eats cereal for dinner and whose apartment is smaller than your office. I don't fit in your world. I don't want to fit in my world anymore." Adrian reached across the table, his hand stopping inches from hers, trembling slightly. "I want to fit in yours. Or better yet, build a new one together. One where I remember how to be human." Maya stared at his hand, so close but not touching, and made a decision. She closed the distance, her fingers sliding between his. The contact was electric, shocking, perfect. Adrian's eyes widened, his breath stopping altogether. His fingers closed around hers with desperate gentleness, as if she might dissolve if he held too tight. "Is this okay?" she asked softly. "It's everything." His voice was rough, wonder bleeding through. "I forgot what this felt like. Connection. Someone choosing to be close to me." They sat like that, hands linked across the table, while the restaurant buzzed around them. It was such a simple thing, holding hands, something teenagers did without thought. But for Adrian it was monumental, a wall breached, a step toward vulnerability he'd spent 3 years avoiding. Maya could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else. Hope, fragile and new, like the first shoots of spring pushing through frozen ground. After dinner, they walked along the Brooklyn waterfront, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water. Adrian kept her hand in his, thumb stroking across her knuckles, as if reassuring himself she was real. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing with the ease of people who were learning to be comfortable in each other's silence. "Can I tell you something?" Adrian stopped walking, turning to face her. The night wind off the river ruffled his hair, making him look less controlled, more human. "I think I knew the moment I caught you at that party, that you were going to change my life. I felt it in my bones, terror and recognition all at once. I felt it too, Maya admitted. I looked at you and saw past all the ice to the lonely man underneath. And I wanted to know you, really know you. Not the CEO or the billionaire or the genius everyone talks about. Just Adrian. Just Adrian hasn't existed in a long time. Then maybe it's time he came back. Adrian stepped closer, and Maya's breath caught. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. His free hand rose slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to move away if she wanted. When she stayed still, his fingers brushed her cheek with the kind of reverent touch usually reserved for priceless art. "I want to kiss you," he whispered. "I've wanted to kiss you since the moment you fell into my arms. But I'm terrified that if I start, I won't be able to stop. That I'll want everything, all of you, and I don't know if I deserve that." "You don't get to decide what you deserve," Maya said, her hand coming up to cover his against her cheek. "I decide what I'm willing to give. And Adrian, I want to give you everything. But we have to move at whatever pace feels safe for you. There's no rush. We have time." "Do we?" His eyes searched hers. "What if we don't? What if something happens, and I've wasted all this time being afraid when I could have been kissing you? Then kiss me now." Maya rose on her toes, closing the distance between them. "Choose being alive over being safe. Just this once." Adrian's control shattered. His mouth found hers with the kind of hunger that spoke of 3 years of nothing followed by suddenly everything. The kiss was deep, consuming, tasting like wine and desperation, and coming home. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back, while his other arm banded around her waist, pulling her flush against him as if he needed to feel every point of contact. Maya gripped his sweater, anchoring herself, kissing him back with equal intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "That was," he paused, searching for words. "I've never felt anything like that." "We're in trouble," Maya whispered, but she was smiling. So much trouble. He kissed her again, softer this time, tender rather than desperate. "Come home with me. Not for anything except being together. I want to talk to you in person instead of through emails. Want to fall asleep knowing you're there. Want to wake up and have you be the first thing I see." They went to his penthouse, which was exactly as Maya expected. Sleek, modern, beautiful, and utterly impersonal, like a hotel rather than a home. Adrian seemed embarrassed by it, leading her through rooms that looked barely lived in. "I don't really use most of this," he admitted. "I mainly stay in my office or the bedroom." The bedroom was warmer, more human. Books stacked on the nightstand. A worn MIT sweatshirt draped over a chair. Photos on the dresser, including one of a laughing young woman who must have been Emma. Maya picked it up gently. She was beautiful. She was everything good about our family. Adrian stood behind her, close but not touching. Warm where we were cold. Open where we were closed. She made everyone feel seen. You remind me of her sometimes. That quality of really looking at people. Maya turned, setting the photo down carefully. "I'm not a replacement for her." "No." Adrian cupped her face with both hands. "You're not a replacement for anyone. You're entirely yourself. And that's what I'm falling in love with. Your kindness, your talent, the way you see beauty in broken things, the way you looked at me like I was worth saving." They spent the night talking, curled up together on his couch with the city glowing beyond the windows. Adrian held her like she might disappear, his arms wrapped around her waist, her back against his chest, his face buried in her hair. They spoke about futures and fears, about what they wanted from life, about whether two people from such different worlds could actually build something real. Maya told him about her dream of opening a design studio that focused on helping small businesses create beautiful brands they could afford. Adrian told her about wanting to shift his company's focus towards sustainable development, about using his wealth for something meaningful rather than just accumulating more. "I want to meet your family," Adrian said suddenly, around 3 in the morning. "If you'll let me. I want to know where you come from, who shaped you into this person who somehow sees value in me." Maya twisted to look at him. "My family isn't like yours. We don't have money or connections or any of that." "Good," he kissed her temple. "Maybe they can teach me to be human again." 2 weeks later, Maya brought Adrian to her mother's house in Queens for Sunday dinner. Her mother, Rosa, was a tiny woman with Maya's eyes and her father's stubbornness. She took one look at Adrian Kane in his carefully casual clothes and designer watch and raised an eyebrow. "So you're the one who's had my daughter walking around like she forgot gravity exists?" Adrian flushed. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Adrian. I know who you are. I have Google." Rosa stepped aside to let them in. "Come eat. You're too thin. What kind of life are you living?" The house was small, warm, filled with the scent of cooking and the sound of Maya's 2 younger brothers arguing over a soccer game on TV. Family photos covered every surface, including many of Maya's father, whose smile Maya had inherited. It was nothing like the cold perfection of Adrian's childhood home, and he looked overwhelmed by the sheer amount of life contained in the cramped space. Dinner was chaos. Rosa's cooking was incredible. Traditional Puerto Rican dishes made with love and too much food. Maya's brothers, Carlos and Luis, grilled Adrian with the protectiveness of men who'd taken on guardian roles after their father died. "You're rich," Carlos said bluntly. "What do you want with our sister?" "Everything," Adrian answered honestly. "If she'll let me. Your sister saw past everything I used to keep people away and decided I was worth her time. That's not something I take lightly." "He's using big words to avoid the question," Luis pointed out. "I'm in love with her," Adrian said simply. "I know it's fast. I know I come from a different world. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I swear I will do everything in my power to be worthy of her, to make her happy, to never take for granted what she's given me." Rosa had been watching silently from her position at the head of the table. Now she leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "My husband told me before he died that the person Maya needed would see her completely, not just the pretty face or the talent. All of her, including the parts she keeps hidden, the sadness she carries, the doubt, the fear that she's not enough." She pointed at Adrian with her fork. "Do you see all of her?" "Yes," Adrian's voice was steady. "I see her exhaustion when she's been working too long, the way she bites her lip when she's anxious, how she looks at her father's photo when she thinks no one is watching, the strength it takes to keep creating beauty when grief tries to steal your color. I see all of it, and I love all of it." Rosa studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, you can keep coming to Sunday dinner, but if you hurt her, my sons will help me hide your body." "That's fair," Adrian agreed. After dinner, while Maya helped her mother in the kitchen, Adrian sat with her brothers, who'd apparently decided he'd passed the first test and were now willing to have an actual conversation. They talked about soccer, about growing up in Queens, about their father and the hole he'd left. Carlos, the older of the two, finally said, "She doesn't let people in easily. Our sister. After Dad died, she went somewhere dark. Took a long time to come back. If you're with her, you need to understand that. She'll try to be strong all the time, push you away when things get hard. You have to be willing to stay anyway." "I understand," Adrian said. "Better than you might think. I do the same thing." "Then maybe you're good for each other." Louise glanced toward the kitchen where they could hear Maya and Rosa laughing. She sounds happy again. We haven't heard her laugh like that in years. Don't fuck it up. I'll try my best not to. In the kitchen, Rosa was more direct. He loves you, she told Maya. Anyone can see it. The question is, do you love him back? I think I do. Maya dried a dish slowly. Is that crazy? We've only known each other 2 months. Your father and I knew after 2 weeks. Rosa smiled at the memory. Sometimes you just know. The question isn't timing. It's whether you're brave enough to choose love when it comes, even knowing it could hurt you. I'm scared, Mama. Good. Love should scare you. It means it matters. Rosa turned to face her daughter fully. But Maya, don't let fear make your decisions. Your father wouldn't want that. He'd want you to grab happiness with both hands and hold on tight. That night, driving back to Manhattan, Adrian was quiet. Maya watched him, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel. What are you thinking? That your family is everything mine wasn't. Warm, accepting, real. He glanced at her. That I want to be part of it, part of your life, not just the pretty parts, but all of it. Sunday dinners and grocery shopping and every mundane, beautiful, ordinary thing. You can be. Maya reached over, taking his hand. If you want that. I want everything with you. He pulled the car over suddenly, putting it in park on a quiet side street. Turning to face her, he said, I love you. I know it's too soon to say it. I know it probably scares you. But Maya, I have spent 3 years feeling nothing. And now I feel everything. And it's all because of you. You brought me back to life. And I don't want to waste another second not telling you the truth. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. Even though you're intense and complicated and you tracked me down like a stalker. Even though loving you terrifies me. I love you. Adrian kissed her with the kind of reverence usually reserved for prayers. Slow and deep and thorough, pouring everything he felt into the connection of their mouths. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he whispered against her lips, Come home with me. Really home. Not just for a night. Move in with me. I know it's fast, but I don't want to spend another night without you. Adrian. I know what you're going to say. It's too soon. We should take it slow. But Maya, I've been taking it slow for 3 years, and slow almost killed me. I want to be reckless with you. Want to build a life together. Want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. Please. Maya should have said no. Should have been practical. Should have remembered all the statistics about relationships that move too fast. But she looked at this man who'd been frozen for years, who was now asking her to help him learn to live again, and found she couldn't refuse him anything. Okay, she whispered. Yes, I'll move in with you. The joy that blazed across Adrian's face was blinding. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe, his face buried in her neck. Thank you, he murmured against her skin. Thank you for choosing me, for seeing me, for loving me when I forgot how to love myself. Moving into Adrian's penthouse was surreal. Maya's entire life fit into a handful of boxes, which looked ridiculous in the massive space. But Adrian insisted on making room for everything, clearing out closets and drawers, saying he wanted her presence in every corner. He helped her unpack, handling her things with careful reverence, asking about the stories behind her possessions, a chipped mug from her father, sketchbooks from high school, the worn blanket she'd had since childhood. Adrian made space for all of it, integrating her life into his. The first few weeks were an adjustment, learning each other's rhythms, habits, preferences. Adrian was meticulously organized, everything in its place, while Maya tended toward creative chaos. He woke at 5 every morning, while she was a night owl who did her best work after midnight. But they found compromises. Adrian learned to leave her art supplies scattered across the dining table. Maya learned to appreciate quiet mornings, watching him drink coffee while reading the news. They learned each other's bodies slowly. Adrian approached physical intimacy with the same careful intensity he brought to everything, asking permission for each touch, each kiss, each new level of closeness. Maya understood it was because he'd denied himself for so long that sensation overwhelmed him. When they finally made love, 6 weeks after she'd moved in, it was profound. Adrian held her like she was precious, moving with deliberate slowness, watching her face with such focused attention that she felt completely seen. Afterward, he held her close, his face buried in her hair, his arms wrapped around her as if he'd never let go. "I was afraid I'd forgotten how to do this," he admitted in the darkness. "How to be close to someone. How to be vulnerable." "You're doing fine." Maya kissed his chest, right over his heart. "Better than fine." But there were hard moments, too. Times when Adrian's grief would surface without warning, usually triggered by something small. A song that reminded him of Emma, a date on the calendar. He'd shut down, retreating into himself, and Maya would have to gently pull him back out. She learned to recognize the signs. The way his shoulders would tense, his expression would blank. She'd take his hand, ground him in the present, remind him that feeling pain meant he was alive. Maya had her own struggles. The imposter syndrome that came from living in a penthouse, from dating a billionaire, from having access to a life she'd never imagined. She'd wake sometimes panicked, convinced this couldn't be real, that she didn't belong. Adrian would talk her down, listing all the reasons he loved her, all the ways she'd changed his life. "You belong here because I choose you here," he'd say. "Your worth isn't determined by money or status. It's intrinsic. You brought beauty into my life when I'd forgotten what beauty looked like." 3 months after she moved in, Adrian took her to meet his parents. The experience was everything Maya feared. His mother was cold, assessing her with the kind of judgment that found everyone wanting. His father barely acknowledged her existence, speaking only to Adrian about business matters. They dined in a palatial estate in Connecticut, where the temperature in every room felt Arctic. Maya understood within minutes why Adrian had become the way he was. This was a house where emotion was weakness, where love was never spoken, where children were investments rather than people to nurture. In the car afterward, Adrian was silent, his jaw tight. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I should have warned you better. They're exactly as terrible as I remember." "They're your parents," Maya said gently. "You don't have to apologize for them. They hated you, I could tell. They hate everyone who might make you happy, because happy people are harder to control." Maya took his hand. "Adrian, you're not them. You broke the cycle. You learned to feel, to love, to be human. That's what matters. I don't want to be like them." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't want to turn cold again, to forget what you've taught me. What if it's genetic? What if I'm broken the same way they are? Then we'll remind you every day that you're not." Maya kissed his knuckles. "Your family, your real family, is the one you choose. My mother, my brothers, Margaret, the people who love you for who you are, not what you can do for them. That's your family now." It was true. Adrian had slowly built a chosen family, reconnecting with college friends he'd pushed away, developing genuine friendships with people who saw past his wealth. He'd started therapy again, working through his grief with a professional who understood trauma. He'd donated millions to causes Emma had cared about, channeling his guilt into something constructive. And through it all, Maya was his anchor, the person who reminded him daily that being vulnerable wasn't weakness. 6 months after Maya moved in, Adrian proposed. Not at a fancy restaurant or some grand public gesture. Instead, he did it on an ordinary Tuesday night, while they were cooking dinner together. Maya was chopping vegetables, telling him about a difficult client, when Adrian suddenly put down the pasta he was stirring and dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen. "What are you doing?" Maya asked, knife frozen midair. "Something I should have done months ago." Adrian pulled a ring from his pocket, simple and elegant, exactly what Maya would have chosen herself. "Maya Rodriguez, you walked into my life by accident and changed everything. You taught me that being alive means feeling everything, joy and pain and love and fear. You showed me that vulnerability is strength, that I deserve happiness, that I'm worth saving. I want to spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice when you decided to love me. Will you marry me?" Maya set down the knife with shaking hands. "Adrian, I know it's fast. I know people will say we're rushing. But I've already wasted 3 years of my life being afraid. I don't want to waste another second. I want to marry you, build a life with you, maybe have children someday if you want. I want everything, Maya. All the ordinary, beautiful moments, all the hard times we'll face together, all of it. Please say yes." "Yes." The word came out as a sob. "Yes, of course, yes." Adrian slid the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then stood, pulling her into his arms. They held each other in the kitchen with the pasta overcooking on the stove and vegetables scattered across the counter, crying and laughing simultaneously. This moment, Maya thought, was more perfectly them than any grand gesture could have been. Real and messy and absolutely right. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Brooklyn. Maya wore a simple dress, Adrian a navy suit. Her family was there, his chosen family. Margaret crying openly. No business associates, no society pages, just the people who mattered. When Adrian saw Maya walking toward him down the makeshift aisle, his composure shattered completely. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't bother wiping them away. Maya's own vision blurred as she took his hands. The officiant asked for their vows. Adrian had written his, pulling a crumpled paper from his pocket with shaking hands. "Maya, you caught me when I was falling, even though I was the one who caught you. You saw past every defense to the lonely man underneath and decided he was worth your time, worth your love. You brought color back into a life that had gone gray. You taught me that living means risking pain, and that the risk is always worth it. I promise to choose you every day, to stay when things get hard, to never let fear win again, to build a life with you that would make both our fathers proud. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you've given me." Maya tried to speak her vows, but couldn't get past the first words before breaking down. Adrian pulled her close, holding her, while she cried against his chest. Finally, she managed to say, "I choose you too. Today, tomorrow, always. You're my home, Adrian. You're my family. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. I promise to remind you every day that you deserve happiness, that you deserve love, that you're so much more than your worst moments. I promise to be the soft place you land, and I promise that no matter what, we'll face it together." When the officiant pronounced them married, Adrian kissed Maya with such tenderness, the entire gathering sighed. They celebrated at Rosa's house afterward, because Maya insisted her mother's cooking was better than any catering could be. Adrian's penthouse would have fit the entire party 3 times over, but Rosa's cramped house filled with love and laughter felt infinitely more appropriate. Carlos and Luis gave speeches that were equal parts heartfelt and threatening, warning Adrian that they knew how to hide bodies. Margaret cried through her entire toast, and Rosa pulled Adrian aside at one point, taking his face in her small hands. "You're part of this family now," she told him, "which means we'll love you fiercely, but we'll also hold you accountable. You take care of my daughter. You honor the gift she's given you. And you remember that family isn't about blood or money. It's about showing up. Every day. Even when it's hard." "I will," Adrian promised. "Thank you for accepting me, for teaching me what real family looks like." Their honeymoon was 2 weeks in a small coastal town in Maine, far from the corporate world and society expectations. They rented a cottage overlooking the ocean, spent days walking beaches and nights talking about their future. Adrian was more relaxed than Maya had ever seen him, his perpetual tension finally easing. They made love with the windows open, the sound of waves providing rhythm. They cooked meals, together, read books, existed in the simple joy of being together without agenda or obligation. One night, lying in bed, watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling, Adrian said, "I want to have children with you. Someday. Not right away, but eventually. I want to be the father mine never was. I want to create the kind of home where kids know they're loved unconditionally." Maya rolled to face him, tracing the line of his jaw. "I want that too. But Adrian, you need to forgive yourself first. For Emma. For the years you lost. For all of it. Our children deserve a father who's at peace with his past. I'm working on it." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Therapy helps. You help more. But you're right. I need to let go of the guilt. Emma would want me to be happy. She'd love you, you know. Would have adopted you as a sister immediately." "Tell me about her," Maya said softly. "Not the sad parts, the good memories." Adrian talked late into the night, sharing stories of his sister, her terrible singing voice and how she'd sing anyway, her obsession with rescue animals, bringing home every stray she found, the way she'd call him out when he took himself too seriously, making him laugh even when he didn't want to, how she'd been the heart of their cold family, the warmth that kept them human. The memories hurt, but they were also healing, letting him remember Emma as she'd been, rather than just as a loss. When they returned to New York, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Adrian had learned to leave work at the office, coming home at reasonable hours to cook dinner with Maya. She'd grown her freelance business into a small design studio, working with the kinds of clients who appreciated her vision. They'd found balance, supporting each other's dreams while building a shared life. 2 years after their wedding, Maya discovered she was pregnant. She told Adrian on a Sunday morning while they were having breakfast. She'd been nervous about his reaction, worried the reality of impending fatherhood might trigger his fears. Instead, Adrian stared at her for a long moment, then burst into tears. "We're having a baby?" His voice broke on the words. "We're having a baby," Maya confirmed. Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she had to remind him to be gentle. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "What if I'm a terrible father? What if I don't know how? Then you'll learn, like you learned everything else, with patience and love, and Maya reminding you that you're capable of more than you think." She cupped his face. "You're going to be an amazing father, Adrian. I know it." Pregnancy transformed Adrian into someone almost unrecognizable from the cold CEO he'd once been. He was overprotective, constantly worried about Maya's health, reading every pregnancy book he could find. He talked to her belly every night, telling their daughter they'd learned she was a girl, about the world she'd be born into, about her Aunt Emma, whom she'd never meet, but who would have loved her fiercely, about her grandmother Rosa, who already had a nursery planned, about all the love waiting for her. When Maya went into labor, Adrian was a disaster. He'd planned everything meticulously, timed the drive to the hospital, packed the bag weeks early. But when her water broke at 3 in the morning, he panicked. Forgot where he'd put the car keys. Started to put on a suit before Maya reminded him she was in labor and didn't care what he wore. By the time they reached the hospital, he'd calmed down, but his hands shook as he helped her into the wheelchair. Labor was long and difficult. 20 hours of Maya in pain, while Adrian held her hand and felt completely helpless. He'd have done anything to take her suffering, to bear it himself. When the contractions were at their worst, he talked her through them, his voice steady, even as his insides churned with fear. "Breathe with me, love. You're so strong. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." When their daughter finally arrived, tiny and perfect and screaming, the nurse placed her on Maya's chest. Adrian looked at his wife, holding their baby, both of them crying, and felt his heart crack open in an entirely new way. This was his family, his real family, built from choice and love and the courage to keep living even when life was terrifying. The nurse asked if he wanted to cut the cord, and Adrian's hands shook so badly Maya had to steady them. But he did it, this final separation that marked their daughter as her own person. They named her Emma Rosa, Emma for his sister, Rosa for Maya's mother. When Adrian held his daughter for the first time, she fit perfectly in his arms. She had Maya's nose and eyes that might become his gray. She was beautiful and fragile and absolutely terrifying. "Hi, Emma," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I'm going to mess up sometimes, but I promise I'll always love you. I promise I'll be there. I promise you'll always know you're wanted." Maya watched him with their daughter and felt overwhelming love. This man who'd been frozen, who'd convinced himself he couldn't feel, now cried openly while holding his baby. He'd come so far from the cold CEO who'd caught her at that party. He'd learned to be human again, to be vulnerable, to love without reservation. And it had all started with an accidental collision and a choice to stay. Sometimes love arrives in the strangest ways. A clumsy fall into a stranger's arms, a touch that cracks through years of ice. Two lonely people who decide to be brave together. Adrian and Maya hadn't planned for each other, hadn't expected their lives to collide. But they'd chosen each other anyway, day after day, through fear and joy and everything between. They'd built something real from nothing, proving that the coldest hearts can learn to feel again if someone is patient enough to wait for the thaw. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Become a member for early access to new stories. And if it truly moved you, click the super thanks button. Your support means everything and helps us keep bringing stories that remind us love is always worth the risk.